It started slow and then it just got stronger and it just seemed to last forever.
This happened on a holiday weekend, and to get resources, it was very difficult.
And a good evening to you. I'm Jessica Harrington. Welcome into this special edition of 23 ABC News at 6. This weekend will mark 1 year since the city of Ridgecrest was rattled by a pair of powerful earthquakes, a magnitude 6.4 on the 4th of July and a 7.1 the following day. Many people around the county still talking about where they were that holiday weekend. So we begin tonight with 23 ABC's Mike Hart, taking us back to one of the biggest natural disasters to hit Kern County since the 2016 Erskine wildfire.
Unexpected fireworks on the 4th of July, a magnitude 6.4 earthquake, or what was later referred to as a foreshock, shook up the high desert, centered about 11 miles outside Ridgecrest at 10:30 in the morning.
All units, we are on citywide earthquake mode.
It knocked everything off the walls. A bookshelf in the upstairs collapsed.
Local stores began posting pictures and video on social media of the damage. And for some residents, it wasn't the first time things were shaken up.
Oh, that's the biggest rock and roll I've had here. In about 5 of them I've had over the years.
Jack Minton's garage caught fire, the video going viral, destroying 2 cars. He told 23 ABC he came home 15 minutes after the earthquake and everything seemed okay.
Nothing was wrong when I first got here. In fact, some 10 minutes later, before I actually spotted the fire in the garage.
One of several fires around Ridgecrest and the surrounding communities.
With the magnitude, we were very grateful that there was such a limited amount of injuries and damage.
Approximately 25 patients that need to be transferred to other facilities. We will be doing that through helicopters or through a ground ambulance.
We have a naval base there, China Lake Naval Weapons Center, that's very important. So we've been assessing the damage there as well.
And it didn't stop there.
Grid search of streets, looking for damage.
The quake and ensuing aftershocks could be felt all across Southern California, even bringing rides at Disneyland to a halt. As we know now, it was just the beginning. Although seismic expert Dr. Lucy Jones told us on July 4th that a bigger one was coming.
There is about a 1 in 20 chance that this location will be having an even bigger earthquake within the next few days, that we have not yet seen the biggest earthquake of the sequence.
And she was right. The 7.1 earthquake, the strongest of that series, struck the next night.
Now is the time. Water, listen to your radio, battery, listen to traditional television.
Because residents in the high desert were going to be feeling it for the rest of the year. Mike Hart, 23 ABC, connecting you.
Following the 2 back-to-back earthquakes, aftershocks continue to hit the Ridgecrest area. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, between July 4th and July 23rd of last year, there were more than 80,000 aftershocks. An estimated 40 mobile homes and trailers were deemed uninhabitable. The roof of the Ridgecrest Cinema partially collapsed and numerous businesses lost goods as the items on shelves fell to the floor. Of those aftershocks, the USGS says 5,900 of them were between 2.0 and 2.9 magnitude. 1,000 of them were between 3.0 to 3.9 magnitude, and 105 of them were 4.0 to 4.9. Last year's quake always present on the minds of people in Kern County. So when the 5.8 magnitude earthquake struck last week, immediately the parallels being drawn, especially since this new quake hit only about 70 miles north of Ridgecrest. The epicenter was in the Lone Pine area. The U.S. Geological Survey reported that the quake hit at 10:40 in the morning on June 24th, and just a few minutes after that, a 3.6 and a 3.1 hit the same area. Several aftershocks have hit that area since the initial quake. And take a look at this video from the Lone Pine Market taken during the quake. It looked very similar to scenes seen when the Ridgecrest quakes happened. Bottles crashing, groceries off the shelves. Workers thought at first the rumblings were from a sonic jet out of the China Lake Naval Weapons Station. For a moment, Ramon Sanchez, a worker at the store, says he felt paralyzed.
You think you know what to do when stuff like this happens, but we just froze in place and just kind of looked around and wondered whether we should try to stop things from falling, but then we just decided to stay, out of harm's way.
And the recent quake also caused a rock slide near Mount Whitney. The Inyo County Sheriff's Office recently providing an update on their Facebook page for the rock slide at the Whitney Portal campgrounds. The post saying the Whitney area has been evaluated by geologists and the southern area of Whitney Porter will remain closed, but most trails will reopen. The emergency evacuation orders have been lifted as well. Meanwhile, our 23 ABC crew was in Ridgecrest the day of that recent quake, and this is what a resident there said about the latest tremor.
I came in the house and sat down, and just about that time I felt a noise coming through. It always sounds like a freight train when an earthquake comes like that. And I thought, well, here comes something. And sure enough, it got more intense, and then pretty soon it was like, this is pretty significant.
I felt a very long roll. It wasn't one of those shakers, it was a rolling. So, and it lasted pretty well. It lasted a long time. I was waiting for it to kind of like climax into a bigger one, usually when you get a roller. But it was pretty scary.
We also spoke to Ridgecrest Police Chief Jed McLaughlin that day, who said he sent a team of officers to search for damage. The team luckily finding no significant damage that day. And we are continuing to track any aftershocks following that 5.8 magnitude earthquake in Lone Pine in Inyo County, just north of Ridgecrest. Here's a look at our earthquake tracker. Since that recent quake, there's been dozens of aftershocks, all of those registering at a magnitude 2.5 or higher. For the latest on earthquakes in Kern County, though, be sure to download our 23 ABC mobile and tablet app. Meanwhile, 23 ABC's Austin Westfall caught up with seismologist Dr. Lucy Jones and local Ridgecrest residents 1 year later to talk about how aftershocks have and will continue to shape the area in the future.
The big stories last July 4th and 5th were, of course, the big shakes, but ever since, a nearly constant stream of smaller aftershocks have been affecting Ridgecrest residents. I decided I want to learn more about aftershocks, so I spoke with renowned earthquake expert, Dr. Lucy Jones.
Every earthquake makes another earthquake more likely.
And the bigger the earthquake, the more aftershocks it will produce, says Dr. Lucy Jones. Jones says quakes as big as the one last summer are rare. In fact, California only sees a 7.0 magnitude event about once a decade. She says it's considered normal that the area is still seeing upwards of hundreds of aftershocks a week, but those aftershocks take a toll.
It wasn't until we moved that I was able to restabilize mentally.
Vincent Tolino's Ridgecrest home was rattled by the two big quakes, and he recently moved out of the state for work. But he says one of the best parts of moving was getting away from the aftershocks. Even though for him the shaking is gone, he says last summer still left a mark.
A truck rolling by, and causes, window pane to rattle a little bit. And, my wife and I literally freeze and look at each other. It's like, no. We're not there anymore.
And since so many others that are still in town feel the same, when will the aftershocks end? Jones says seismologists will figure that out by examining the number of earthquakes that normally happened in Ridgecrest before the July 4th event and comparing it to the numbers of quakes happening after. She uses the example of how many earthquakes happened in 1 week last June compared to now.
You had 7 earthquakes in a week a year ago, and you had 250 in a week this year in June.
Until the area's seismic activity returns to its normal rate, all smaller quakes in the area will be considered aftershocks. Jones says the frequency of aftershocks has been and will continue to decrease gradually as time passes, but for it to truly get back to its normal rate will be a matter of quite a few years, as was the case with the 7.5 magnitude Tehachapi quake that happened in 1952.
It did not get back to that background rate until the 1990s.
Jones anticipates, however, that the Ridgecrest area will return to normal quicker than Tehachapi because the Ridgecrest event was a smaller magnitude. When asked about the likelihood that another large-scale quake happens in the area, Jones said it's more likely that there will only continue to be magnitude 1, 2, 3, some 4, and rarely a 5. The seismologist also underlining the importance of always being ready for something bigger.
Most likely it doesn't happen, but you can't say it won't happen.
Dr. Jones says that any earthquake that happens within a 30-mile radius of the Ridgecrest earthquake's fault zone is considered an aftershock to that quake. Last week's 5.8 magnitude Lone Pine quake happened just outside of that zone. But for now, Austin Westfall, 23 ABC, connecting you.
And as Austin mentioned there, the recent earthquake in Lone Pine was not along the same fault line as the quakes that struck Ridgecrest last year. Dr. Jones explaining during a recent interview we did with her not long after the Lone Pine quake.
This is a different fault than the Ridgecrest earthquake, and it's far enough away that it doesn't fall within the traditional definition of aftershocks. Rather, we would look at it as its own earthquake.
According to NASA and the U.S. Geological Survey, the Ridgecrest quake last year happened along what is known as the Garlock Fault, a major east-west fault running more than 185 miles from the San Andreas Fault to Death Valley. And the strain placed on the Garlock Fault by July's earthquake activity triggered it to start slowly moving, a process called fault creep. The fault has slipped 0.8 inches at the surface since last year. We turn now to another community hit hard by the earthquakes last year. The community at the Naval Air Base at China Lake, just 3 miles outside of Ridgecrest. According to estimates by base officials, the quakes severely rattled the Naval Air Weapons Station in China Lake, a sprawling desert facility where some of the military's most advanced weapons are tested. Over $3 billion will go into fixing the naval base after hundreds of their facilities were damaged by the Ridgecrest earthquakes. 23 ABC's Daniela Garrido was there a year ago to cover the damage and now has an update on where the base stands today.
It's been a year since the China Lake Naval Base was shaken by the Ridgecrest earthquakes last summer. The base makes up 85% of the Navy's land for research, development, and acquisition. It also sits on the 2 fault lines that shifted during the 6.4 and 7.1 magnitude earthquakes.
It's a stoppage in time. It's a snapshot in time post 7.1 magnitude earthquake.
Over 230 facilities, or 20% of the base's buildings, were damaged after the earthquakes, including everyday use facilities such as a chapel, a commissary, and a school. Today, a year later, there's still a lot of major and minor work to be fixed.
So we've started with the recovery efforts. Fortunately, Congress appropriated about $3 billion to aid in the recovery efforts. And so we're underway with developing the scope of works and getting ready to award contracts to replace different facilities.
For about a week after the earthquakes, flight operations were halted on the base. For now, fixing the plane hangars has been a priority for the recovering base.
The highest priority for us were some of the facilities at the airfield, which we are very close to awarding those here in September. Those projects we awarded, again, Congress had appropriated funds for those, and we're very glad for that, and then we'll be able to get that reconstruction effort underway here shortly.
A chapel that once served hundreds was red tagged after the earthquake.
All the statuary was broken and smashed in pieces, all the religious statuary that's in there.
And still remains that way today.
Fortunately, we'll be able to find some other facilities where we'll be able to hold religious services on the installation in the interim. That'll go forward until the new facility is constructed.
The base says they've also taken this time to modernize certain facilities.
We took an eye, as you know, some of the facilities were from the 40s and the 50s, so a little older. So we took the opportunity as we were developing plans and working on the replacements or upgrades to facilities to bring things up to modern standards and such.
Now that funding has been secured, the China Lake Naval Base hopes to officially begin their Ridgecrest recovery efforts in September. In Ridgecrest, I'm Daniela Garrido, 23 ABC News, connecting you.
And still to come, the hardest hit place in Ridgecrest, the local theater rebuilds.
You know, we're a small business, we're independently owned, we don't have all of that training behind us. So we spent the first 2 months after the earthquake making sure that we had all that in line and making sure that everyone knew what to do in the event of something happening.
More on the reopening of the theater and the impact the quakes had on other businesses when this special edition of 23 ABC News at 6 returns. Welcome back. Tonight, we are not just looking back at what happened last year, we're also looking forward. 23 ABC's Bayan Wang has more on how the hardest hit businesses in Ridgecrest have been affected while taking a new battle in the midst of a pandemic.
The community of Ridgecrest is a resilient one. Despite 2 major earthquakes rattling the city in July, residents still choose to underscore the obstacles they've overcome before speaking of the trauma they still carry. But with thousands of aftershocks that occur in Ridgecrest on a daily basis, those consistent jolts serve as a reminder of what happened on July 4th and 5th of last year and how it affected the businesses that mean so much to the community.
The 6.4 and 7.1 earthquakes that rattled Ridgecrest in July 2019 were the biggest to hit California in nearly 2 decades.
Get under the table. Oh my
my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
The back-to-back quakes were a haunting reminder that destruction is part of California's DNA, stored beneath the surface.
People seem to forget this is the earthquake state.
It was very shaky, very violent, and it just terrified everybody.
Dozens of homes were red tagged, displacing hundreds of people. The Ridgecrest cinemas.
The roof is the roof caved in on it.
It's the community's only theater and would typically pack a full house on any summer night. But on the Friday the 7.1 hit, there was a blessing in disguise. The theaters were closed.
This is like one of the main things that we really have to do.
Residents like Sonia Gonzalez viewing the big screen with a sense of gratitude since it has reopened.
This place really brings all of us together, and it's just really amazing to be able to have this opportunity to come and watch movies.
But for the other staple in town, the Sierra bowling lanes, a different outcome played out, according to Tim Smith, the executive director of Ridgecrest's Chamber of Commerce.
The cost associated with repairing and replacing it was prohibitive, and so since the July 4th, we haven't had the bowling alley be able to reopen.
For some businesses, it wasn't the earthquake that delivered the final blow. It was the financial burden caused by the COVID-19 pandemic.
We've lost 2 restaurants due to the shutdown, and so as they weathered the first earthquake and that first storm, they were unable to weather the second one.
In the midst of a pandemic and fear of another big earthquake striking, many residents are left with an elevated sense to be prepared, stockpiling groceries and other essentials.
You have to, just in case if there was a big one, this fell apart, we wouldn't have had any supplies, so you have to keep your supplies.
Ridgecrest Police Chief Jed McLaughlin said when the pandemic came into play, city officials had to navigate some of its resources from earthquake recovery efforts to pandemic initiatives. Currently, however, officials are working on repairing damaged sewer lines and roadways, all while hoping businesses make it out of the pandemic still operating. For 23 ABC, Bayan Wang, connecting you.
And still ahead, the governor speaking out on the recent quakes.
If we didn't need to be reminded, Mother Nature made sure we were reminded of her fury.
Why Lone Pine and last year's quakes are another reminder to utilize a new tool for staying safe when this special edition of 23 ABC News at 6 returns. Welcome back. Recent quakes prompting Governor Gavin Newsom to address it during a daily briefing on COVID-19. Newsom saying it's another reminder for Californians to always be prepared.
If we didn't need to be reminded, Mother Nature made sure we were reminded of her fury. Almost a year ago, in 2 weeks, we had a major earthquake in the state of California, Ridgecrest. Just about 20 minutes ago, we experienced another trembler, just 5.8 on the Richter scale, but enough to remind all of us of our responsibilities as Californians, our vulnerabilities as Californians as it relates to the issue of earthquakes.
Governor Newsom also recommending that all Californians download the MyShake Earthquake Early Warning app. And the U.S. Geological Society telling us more about the MyShake app, a new tool to help families prepare and take action during a quake. They say the MyShake prototype app and emergency alerts for phones are designed to be an early warning system that notifies cell phone users when ground shaking from a nearby earthquake will reach them. That alert hopefully allowing them enough time to duck and cover before the quake strikes. Experts say the time of the notification all depends on how close you are to the epicenter.
The waves are traveling out from the earthquake. The system calculates as fast as it can and sends out the alert. If you're really nearby, the waves got to you before the alert did. If you're farther away and the waves are taking longer to get there, but you get the alert at the same time as, people in LA got the alert at the same time as people in Bakersfield. But you got the waves before we did because you're closer.
Dr. Jones says the system is to alert you to the quake, and the goal is to get the emergency alert to nearby users before they feel any shaking. That doesn't always happen, and sometimes you may feel the waves before receiving the alert here in Bakersfield. Officials saying for MyShake to work, you must have location services enabled. For information on how to get the MyShake app, be sure to head to our website, turnto23.com. This special edition of 23 ABC News at 6. We'll be right back. And that's going to do it for this special edition of 23 ABC News. You can find all of the stories you saw tonight and important information related to earthquakes on our website at turnto23.com. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.